clink of champagne glasses was deafening. My son Tom stood silhouetted against the window. A wave of polite applause rippled through the crowded ballroom, but I heard my daughter Clara's sharp laugh beside me. "He still thinks he's on the board," she whispered to her husband, loud enough for me to hear. "Look at him, completely lost." The laughter was like glass grinding in my ears. They saw a relic, a monument to a past they had successfully packaged and sold. On a massive screen behind Tom, a press release glowed, the Omnicorp logo prominently displayed next to ours. The number was there in bold, $8 million. I saw old colleagues, men I built this company with, avert their eyes. They knew what this was, a public execution. My own children had me cornered in a gilded cage of their success, displaying my defeat for all to see. I didn't move. My hands were folded calmly in my lap, my breathing even. I met Tom's triumphant gaze from across the room and held it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face before he masked it with a broader smile. He couldn't understand my silence. He expected rage or tears or a pathetic plea. He had no idea that the foundation he was celebrating on was built of sand. The crowd began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Tom raised his glass higher. His victory lap just seconds away. The wire transfer for the sale was scheduled for the first banking day of the new year. A done deal. He thought he had taken everything. He thought the game was over. But 3 months earlier, on a quiet Tuesday, it all began with a simple condescending question. My home always smelled of solder and aging paper, a scent my late wife Evelyn used to call the smell of progress. It was more of a workshop than a house, every surface covered in prototypes and schematics. I was sketching a new gimbal design when Tom and Clara arrived, their expensive shoes clicking uncomfortably on the worn floorboards. "Dad, we need to talk," Tom said, his tone that of a parent addressing a difficult child. They sat stiffly on the sofa, pushing aside a stack of technical journals. "The company needs a more modern approach," Clara began, avoiding my eyes. "You've done great work, foundational work, but investors want to see a forward-facing leadership team." The words were polished, rehearsed. They weren't asking for my opinion. They were delivering a verdict. Tom gestured around the room with a sweep of his hand, a faint look of disgust on his face. "This is the problem. You're stuck in the past. The company can't be run out of a museum." I looked at my hands, stained with graphite and flux. These hands had built an empire from nothing, had paid for the varied degrees that gave them the words they now used as weapons against me. His eyes landed on a dusty shelf above my main workbench. Sitting there was the Chronomix 74, my first successful prototype. It was a clunky, oversized time code generator, built from scavenged parts. It was the device that secured our first patent, the very DNA of Sterling innovations. It looked absurdly primitive now, a metal box with a single flickering Nixie tube display. Dad, you still have this old junk?" Tom scoffed, standing up to get a closer look. He didn't touch it, as if its obsolescence might be contagious. "Throw it out. It's worthless. It just makes the place look cluttered." Clara nodded in agreement, her focus on a smudge on her silk blouse. They saw a piece of trash, not the cornerstone of their inheritance. I said nothing. Just watched them. To them, value was only what was new, what was next. They had no reverence for the foundation. That was their mistake. I felt a familiar, quiet ache. It wasn't just about a prototype. It was about memory. Evelyn had been the one who'd soldered the final connection on that board with me, her hands steady where mine had been trembling with excitement. A week later, they brought the first stack of papers. "Just some administrative updates, Dad," Tom said, spreading them on my one clean table. "Updating corporate governance, streamlining the share structure, standard stuff." He slid a pen towards me. The documents were dense, filled with legalese designed to be impenetrable. I felt a prickle of unease. "I'd like my lawyer to look these over," I said mildly. Clara sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Dad, we are your family. Why would you need a lawyer? Don't you trust us? We're trying to secure your legacy, to make it worth more than you ever imagined." The words "your legacy" were a poison dart. They were framing its destruction as an act of preservation. They were smart. They mixed in legitimate routine documents with the ones that mattered. a vote to approve a new supplier, a standard tax form, and tucked between them, a transfer of voting rights on a portion of my founder's shares. I spotted it, but played along, signing the innocuous papers and setting the dangerous one aside. "I'll get to this one later," I told them. Their smiles tightened. The pressure mounted. Daily calls. Emails marked urgent. They began talking about my health, my forgetfulness, in conversations with company executives they thought I wasn't privy to. They were building a narrative. The brilliant founder in his twilight. A sentimental old man who needed to be protected from himself. They weren't just taking my company. They were trying to take my mind, my credibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked into the workshop and my hand drifted to a framed photo. It was Tom and Clara, ages 7 and 9, standing in this very room. They were wearing tiny, oversized lab coats I'd made for them. I remembered letting them help with my inventions, their small fingers fumbling with colored wires, as I guided their hands, explaining the magic of turning an idea into something real. "You're making the future, Daddy," Clara had said, her voice filled with awe. They weren't just my children. They were meant to be my partners, my successors. I had poured all my knowledge and passion into them, hoping they would carry the torch. Now, they were using that fire to burn down the house I had built for them. The contrast was a physical pain. The memory of their innocent belief in me versus the cold, strategic cruelty of their current campaign. This wasn't just business. It was a deeper, more personal form of patricide. They wanted to erase me from my own story, to become the sole authors of a success they had inherited, not earned. The first public blow came at the quarterly board meeting, a month later. I walked in expecting the usual agenda. Instead, Tom called an emergency vote. Due to Silas's reduced engagement and in the interest of agile leadership, he announced, reading from a prepared statement, "We propose restructuring the board and moving our founder to the honorary position of chairman emeritus." It was a bloodless coup. The voting rights they'd secured, combined with the shares they already controlled, gave them the majority. I was stripped of my power in less than 5 minutes. The room was silent, the air thick with embarrassment. My old friend and CFO, Arthur, stared at his hands. They had gotten to him, too. No one met my gaze. Clara delivered the final, patronizing justification. "Dad's too sentimental to make the right business decision. We're modernizing. This is for the best, for everyone." They were acting as if they had done me a favor, putting their senile father out to pasture while they heroically saved the farm. The humiliation was a cold weight in my chest. As I left the boardroom, the door didn't latch properly. I heard Tom's voice, low and triumphant. He took it better than I thought. He has no idea about the Omnicorp buyout offer. We'd have added $1.2 million to our net worth. The number hung in the air. This wasn't just about control. It was a cash grab, pure and simple. They were selling my life's work for parts. My first call was to my personal lawyer, George. We'd been friends for 40 years. I explained the situation, the forced emeritus status, the overheard conversation about a buyout. George was furious on my behalf. "This is an outrage, Silas. They can't do this. You're the heart of that company. Let me look at the corporate bylaws. There has to be a failsafe you put in." For a few days, I felt a flicker of hope. George was a brilliant lawyer. He pored over the decades of documents, some searching for a loophole, a forgotten clause, anything we could use to block them. "I think I found something," he said over the phone a few days later. "The original charter has some very specific language about the founder's role. It might be enough to file an injunction." The hope was a welcome warmth in the spreading cold of their betrayal. An injunction. It was a start, a way to fight back. It meant I wasn't powerless yet. George scheduled an emergency meeting with their counsel. I spent the weekend gathering my old notes, preparing my case, feeling the familiar fire of a challenge rekindle inside me. I was ready for a fight. I had no idea how thoroughly they had planned for it. We met in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. Tom and Clara sat opposite me, their lawyer between them. George presented our case with his usual calm authority, citing the founder's clauses from the original 1974 corporate charter. "These provisions are clear," he concluded. Silas Sterling cannot be marginalized in this way. Any major structural change, including a sale, requires his active consent. Their lawyer, a sharp woman in her 30s, simply smiled. She slid a single document across the college table. That may have been true, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Until last year. It was a corporate resolution, amending the bylaws. It specifically nullified the founders' clauses George had been referencing. It was dated March 12, 2019. It bore my signature. I stared at my own name on the page. I remembered the day. Clara had brought a stack of year-end tax filings to my house. She'd been so charming, so helpful, talking about her daughter's school play while I signed page after page. She had buried this poison pill in a mountain of paperwork, and I had walked right into the trap. The hope I'd felt curdled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. George was stunned into silence. He had been so confident. Now he just kept looking from the document to me, his expression a mixture of pity and defeat. Tom leaned forward, his mask of concern gone, replaced by undisguised triumph. As you can see, everything is perfectly legal. We're just looking out for the company's best interests. Dad's signature is right there. The false hope was gone, crushed completely. That night, the house felt cavernous. The smell of solder and paper no longer felt like progress. It smelled like decay. I walked into my workshop, and my eyes fell on the Chronomix 74, the prototype Tom had called junk. It sat on its dusty shelf, a silent monument to my own obsolescence. It represented everything I had lost: my past, my company, my children's love. It was a bitter, physical reminder of my failure. The weeks that followed were a blur of escalating legal maneuvers. They filed a motion to have me declared mentally incompetent, using my hoarding of old prototypes as evidence. They leaked stories to the financial press about my erratic behavior. Every day brought a fresh humiliation, a new layer of betrayal. They were just winning. They were salting the earth, so nothing could ever grow again. My resources were dwindling. My personal accounts were frozen pending the competency hearing. George was working pro bono, but the legal fees for discovery and depositions were piling up. Tom and Clara, using the company's vast resources, were burying us in paperwork. The ticking clock was the Omnicorp deal. They needed it to close by year's end for tax purposes. I was forced to sell off some of my personal assets, a collection of vintage testing equipment, my small portfolio of stocks. Each sale felt like giving up another piece of myself. I ate simple meals, the silence of the large house pressing in. The warmth and life Evelyn and I had built here was being systematically dismantled, sold off to fund a war I was losing. One rainy afternoon, I was sorting through old files in the basement, looking for anything that could help. My hands, stiff with age, fumbled with a box labeled Burley Patents. Inside were brittle, yellow documents, the blueprints of my life. I felt a profound sense of despair. What was the point? They had thought of everything. They had my signature on their side. That evening, my granddaughter Lucy called. She was away at college and knew nothing of the corporate battle. "Grandpa, my robotics professor was talking about foundational tech, and he mentioned your first patent, the Chronomix one. He said it was revolutionary for its time." Her innocent enthusiasm was a sharp, painful contrast to the reality I was living. "He said you must have been a genius." After the call, I sat in the dark workshop. I found myself staring at the old prototype again. Junk, worthless, just taking up space. That's what Tom had said. My eyes drifted from the device itself to the small, tarnished brass plate I'd affixed to its base decades ago. I hadn't looked at it in years. It read, "Property of Silas Sterling. On loan to Sterling Innovations." It was the wording that struck me. On loan. Why would I have written that? It was a strange choice of phrase. A jolt, not of memory, but of instinct, shot through me. I spent the rest of the night tearing through the basement archives, my weariness replaced by frantic energy. I wasn't looking for corporate bylaws anymore. I was looking for something else. At 3 a.m. I found it. It wasn't with the patent filings or the corporate charters. It was in a binder labeled Personal Equipment Leases, tucked away with receipts for oscilloscopes and frequency counters I'd bought myself. It was a single-page service agreement drafted on a typewriter. It detailed the lease of the Chronomix 74 prototype and the patent it represented, to my own company for the sum of $1 per year. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had created the agreement in the company's infancy, a legal firewall to protect my core intellectual property in case the fledgling business failed. I, Silas Sterling the man, had leased the patent to Sterling Innovations, the company. The company didn't own its founding technology. It rented it. From me, and I had completely forgotten about it. My eyes scanned the dense text, my finger tracing the critical clause my younger, more cautious self had insisted upon. The inventor's rights clause. It stated that any sale, transfer, or acquisition of the company as a whole required the personal, notarized signature of the lessor, me, on the specific sale agreement. Any attempt to circumvent this clause would result in the immediate and permanent termination of the lease. The patent would revert to me. The very foundation of the company, the technology on which every subsequent innovation was built, would be pulled out from under it. Sterling Innovations would be reduced to a hollow shell. They were trying to sell a house. They didn't own the land beneath. The prototype wasn't junk. It was the deed to the entire kingdom. My calm returned, but it was different now. It was cold, sharp, and precise. I made a high-resolution scan of the service agreement. I checked the state registry online. The lease was still active, renewed automatically every year with my corporate filings. A tiny line item nobody, including me, had ever bothered to question. I had focused on the corporate structure, never thinking to check the ownership of the core asset itself. A few days later, a video conference call was scheduled. My court-appointed psychologist was to interview Tom and Clara about my declining mental state. They thought I had declined the video link, but I had my own IT expert, a young man I'd mentored years ago, patch me into the audio feed, my microphone muted. They thought they were speaking in private. "He's just so confused all the time," Clara said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "He keeps talking about old projects, things that don't matter anymore. He gets agitated when we discuss the Omnicorp deal. It's for his own good that we take control. But stress is too much for him." Her performance was flawless, chilling in its perfection. Tom added his part. "Honestly, Doctor, we're just trying to preserve his legacy. The $8 million from the sale will go into a trust for his care. We're taking a nominal fee for managing the transition, of course. Just $1 per sibling as a symbolic transfer of ownership to finalize things before the wire transfer clears. A single dollar. That was the final insult. They were going to buy my entire life's work for $2, after which the $8 million would be theirs to control." The psychologist murmured some sympathetic platitudes. I listened, my face a mask of stone. They had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed, their own admission of the scheme recorded. With the recording secured and the service agreement in hand, I was ready. I didn't need to fight their competency claims or their corporate maneuvers. I just needed to let them complete the sale. I needed their hubris to be at its absolute peak. The trap was not something I had to set. They had built it themselves and were walking into it with their eyes wide open. The day before New Year's Eve, George came to my house. I laid everything out for him, the original lease, the inventor's rights clause, the recording of the call. He read the document 3 times, his eyes widening with each pass. A slow smile spread across his face. "Silas, my friend," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is a work of art. It's beautiful." I instructed him to do nothing. "Not yet. Let them have their party, George. Let them announce it to the world. Let them sign the final papers with Omnicorp." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "They built this stage to humiliate me," I said quietly. "It's only fitting we use it for the final act." The scent of solder in the air now smelled like victory. So I accepted their invitation to the New Year's Eve party. I dressed quietly, chose a tie Evelyn had given me, and prepared myself. They had arranged for a car to pick me up. Another gesture of performative care for the benefit of their audience. As I sat in the back of the town car, Watching the city lights blur past, I felt no anger, only a profound, tectonic calm. The future was coming, and that brought me back to the ballroom. The countdown was reaching its crescendo. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. Confetti cannons erupted, showering the cheering crowd in shimmering gold. Tom and Clara hugged each other, their faces alight with greedy triumph. On the screen behind them, the Omnicorp logo flashed, paired with a message: "Welcome Sterling Innovations to the future." Tom strode over to me, champagne in hand, his smile wide and predatory. "Happy New Year, Dad. A new era." He handed me a folder. Just the final formality, a transfer of assets for the symbolic sum of $1 for our records. He clipped a pen and held it out to me. He expected me to sign away my legacy for a single insulting dollar. I took the pen, but I didn't sign. Instead, I looked up at him, and for the first time that night, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise around us. "You know, Tom, I was just thinking about the Chronomic 74. He frowned, confused by the non sequitur. "What? That piece of junk? Dad, now's not the time for rambling." I ignored him, my gaze sweeping to include Clara, who had walked over. It was the foundation of everything. The very first patent. Patent number 3,825,907. Our side of the number for memory. A funny thing about that patent, the company never owned it. It was personally leased, a service agreement. The smiles on their faces began to falter. A hush was falling over our small circle as people nearby sensed the shift in tone. "The agreement contains an inventor's rights clause," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It requires my personal notarized signature for any sale of the company. Without it, the deal you just announced is fraudulent, and any attempt to proceed terminates the lease permanently." Tom laughed, a short, nervous bark. "You're delusional. Our lawyers vetted everything." "Did they?" I asked calmly. "Did they check the personal equipment leases from 1974? Or did they just look at the corporate structure you so cleverly amended?" The color drained from his face. Clara stared at me, her eyes wide with dawning horror. They knew I wasn't bluffing. I pulled my phone from my pocket. At midnight, an email was sent to Omnicorp's general counsel as well as the SEC. It contained a copy of the original service agreement, a notice of lease termination effective immediately due to breach of contract, and a cease and desist letter. I paused. It also included an audio file of you both discussing your plan to defraud me. Clara gasped. Tom looked like he had been physically struck. "The wire transfer for the sale, scheduled for the first banking day of the new year, will be blocked," I said. "The asset you sold them no longer belongs to the company they bought. As of 1 minute ago, Sterling Innovations is a hollowed-out shell with no claim to its core intellectual property." A man in a sharp suit, Omnicorp's lead counsel I presumed, was already striding towards us, his face a thundercloud, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't even look at Tom and Clara. His furious eyes were locked on me. "Mr. Sterling," he barked, "we have a serious problem." "No," I corrected him gently. "My children have a serious problem. You just have a bad investment." Tom finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Why? Why would you do this? You've destroyed the company." "No, Tom," I said, placing the unsigned dollar transfer form back in his limp hand. "You destroyed our family. I am just protecting my property." I turned from him to face his sister, who was now openly weeping. "Dad's too sentimental," I quoted her own words back at her. "He can't make the right business decision." "You were right about one thing, Clara. This is a business decision." The crowd was silent now, watching the drama unfold. The confetti at their feet like debris from a shipwreck. The public humiliation they had planned for me was now entirely their own. I could see the gears turning in Tom's head. Lawsuits, fraud charges, the collapse of their reputations. He had wanted a modern company, a forward-facing leadership. Now he was facing complete ruin. The $8 million they had tasted for a few glorious minutes had vanished, replaced by a debt of scandal they would never be able to repay. The memory of them as children in my lab, their eyes wide with wonder, flashed in my mind one last time. It wasn't a painful memory anymore. It was just a picture in a book that was now closed. Evelyn would have been heartbroken by their greed, but she would have understood the necessity of this action. This wasn't revenge. It was a course correction. Tom made one last, desperate attempt. "Dad, please, we can fix this. We can call them, explain." "There is nothing to fix," I said, my voice final. "You made your choices. You signed your documents. Now I will sign mine." I turned to the Omnicorp lawyer, who was still sputtering with rage. "The patent for the Chronomex 74 and all its derivatives has reverted to my personal ownership," I informed him crisply. "If Omnicorp is still interested in acquiring the technology, they can negotiate with me directly. My starting price is $15 million. And my children will have no part in the discussion." The lawyer's eyes narrowed, the anger shifting to calculation. He understood the new reality instantly. He was a businessman, and the asset was still viable, even if the sellers were not. He nodded curtly. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Sterling." He turned his back on my children without another word. Their final insult, their last act of supreme arrogance, was thinking I was too old, too sentimental, too irrelevant to see what they were doing. They had dismissed me, and in doing so, they had dismissed the very foundation of their own wealth and power. They forgot that the old man they were casting aside had built the house they were living in, and he remembered where all the load-bearing walls were. I looked at my children, truly looked at them, standing amidst the ruins of their grand party. They were no longer the titans of industry they had pretended to be just minutes before. They were just two people who had let greed consume them. They looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. They had nothing left to say. I didn't need to say anything more either. The service agreement had said it all. The junk on the shelf had spoken louder than any argument I could have made. I straightened my tie, the tie Evelyn had given me, feeling its familiar silk. The air in the ballroom was thick with failure, but for me, it tasted clean and new. Without a backward glance at the wreckage of my children's ambition, I walked away from them. I pushed through the stunned crowd, past the wilting decorations and the cooling champagne, and out the grand doors, into the cold, clear air of the new year. I had a phone call to make.